Once the fundamentals of poker are learned, what is the skill that separates an average player from a crusher? Drum roll, please. I'd have to go with hand reading. Hand reading is a logical process that most people can learn to master, but it gets a whole lot harder when you're in an environment with all new players and with prop games and other incentives at play that mess with some of the ranges. It's exactly the environment I was in recently in Texas, playing on a TCH live stream, 5-10-25. I'm going to talk about my process and my hand reading through 5 of the most exciting hands that I played. Stay tuned. At the end of this video, you will be able to hand read much more effectively than you did before you started watching. All right, so coming in at number 5, we have Waking Up in the Straddle with Ace King off. Kenny decides to make it 175 from the cutoff with King of Spades, Jack of Spades. Pretty standard given that the $50 straddle is on currently. And I'm going to be bumping this up, of course. I want to go on the bigger side given that I'll be out of position post-flop if Kenny does call. So I want to cut down on Kenny's implied odds, which will be favorable for me. I decide to go 825. Could have even gone a little bit bigger, could have gone more like the full 5x or even 6x, but this is totally fine, and Kenny decides to call. Some of the time, Kenny could have turned this hand into a 4-bet bluff, but I think he respects that I have a pretty tight range in most spots, and he decides to just take a flop in position. So we go to the flop, and it is Ace of Diamonds, 5 of Hearts, Deuce of Clubs, and it's a good time to just pause and think about the ranges of both players involved. So let's start with Kenny. Kenny opened from the cutoff, and he's been playing a little bit on the looser side tonight. I'd imagine his starting range is around 30-ish% of hands, and he's probably folding the very bottom of that to my 3-bet. He's also probably 4-betting the very best of that. So that probably leaves around a 20% range that he's calling with, and I'd imagine it's a lot of pocket pairs from deuces through maybe jacks, suited Broadway hands, suited connector hands, suited aces, some other gappers, and some random like suited hands that potentially are just kind of getting in there on stream, and the remaining offsuit hands maybe like ace queen off and a little bit of ace jack off and king queen off if those hands get stubborn. Now, it's a little counterintuitive here because most people would say, okay, you have the range advantage, you have aces, you have ace king, you should be c-betting this board quite often. But actually, given how deep we are and the fact that I don't have deuces in my range, I don't have 5s in my range here, I don't have ace deuce suited the way Kenny does, it forces me to do a decent amount of checking. I also have a big part of my range, like 10s through kings, that doesn't want to bet that big. I want to play a smaller pot with that portion of my range. Even if I have pocket aces, I don't want to go especially big because it's hard for Kenny to have something that can call multiple streets here. And lastly, my bluffs, of course, want to go smaller to get those cheap folds when Kenny has a complete whiff. So most of my range is incentivized to either check or go small. That's what I decide to do. I bet a quarter pot here, and I thought it was a size that Kenny might take for weakness here and might make some mistakes against. It turns out that was the case. Decided to go 400. Kenny looks at me for a bit, thinks it over, maybe puts me on a hand like 10s through kings where if I face a raise, it's going to be pretty tough to deal with. He decides to go to 1350. And of course, I'm not going anywhere. I call fairly quickly here. This is just always going to call. I don't want to re-raise Kenny because his range when he raises me is typically going to be hands like ace queen or better. So most of that range is beating me. Aside from ace queen, he's going to have ace deuce suited, ace 5 suited, deuces 5s, maybe even some 3-4 suited if he was loose enough to call with that pre-flop. And then he's going to have a lot of air and stuff like 3s and maybe 4s that may want to bluff later and put more money into the pot. So I definitely don't want to be bloating the pot against the range that polar. I'd rather call and allow him to make bluffing mistakes later at this stack depth. So I decide to call. The turn is a 6 of hearts. Quick check over to Kenny, and he decides to check it back. At this moment, I am positive he does not have 2 pair or better. I know I have the best hand, and now it's just a matter of what do I want to do on the river. It's a little bit tricky because often if I go for value here, Kenny's got the part of his range that is a lot of air after he's checked back the turn, given how polar he was on the flop. So there's not a whole lot I can bet for value against, maybe occasionally ace queen, although maybe some of the time Kenny will bet that himself for value when I check to him again. So I decide to check again, hoping that he might bluff. He decides to just shut it down, doesn't go for it. We turn it over, and we win a nice pot. So coming in at number 4, I again have ace-king offsuit, but this hand plays quite a bit differently. We have the nit game going on, which is basically the stand-up game, but we're sitting down because poker players are a little lazier than they used to be. So I raise it from under the gun, and OFC decides this is his moment to try to get rid of his nit button potentially. He's going to 3-bet me because he's got the button. He's got a live stream audience that wants to see people playing the Robbie or the Jack 4 offsuit. And I just thought it was a moment where he might be getting a little bit out of line and he might be light. So normally I would 4-bet this hand, but I just thought it would play better as a call and let him blast off on boards that actually smash my hand. Turns out that we get a board where he actually outflops me. It's a 9 of spades, 8 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds board. Of course, he's going to have a lot of very strong hands when he 3-bets my early position open. So maybe hands like 10s plus, ace king, ace queen suited, some maybe ace jack suited, king queen suited, but he's also going to have suited aces, some suited connectors, and just random hands like this that just want to show off on stream. So keeping that range in mind, I don't think he has a lot of sets here. Maybe some of the time he is 8-9 suited, but so much of his range is very vulnerable to a check raise. A lot of it is whiffs, weak pairs. Maybe he's got some over pairs here.
Ooh, Joel, PTO poker. What's he doing?
He says, this hand ain't a turd. We ain't floating. We're raising.
Oh my gosh. That was a great analogy. I could visualize.
Ace king indeed is not a turd.
Ace king is not a turd.
We ain't floating, baby.
But even over pairs aren't like fist pumping when I can easily have like 8s and 9s and 8-9 suited, and maybe some of the time 4s, given that we are playing the nit game and I'm a little wider here than normal. So I decided to go for it. I'm going to check raise here, and I decide to 3-exit to 1500. With the ace of diamonds in my hand, the plan is that on a lot of flush completers, we're going to be going for broke here and applying maximum pressure against his range. I need to have some bluffs on flush completers. I can't just be, having the nuts every time a flush completes or having like a set here. I need some bluffs. I decide to use this hand, and he luckily folds bottom pair here. We get to turn it over. We get to get rid of our nit button.
It was not the best hand there after the flop, but sure as hell got the job done and got rid of the nit button. Pretty fantastic stuff.
The nit button again, with the stand-up game, if you are the last one to win a hand, you have to pay the rest of the players out in this particular format an $100 penalty. So it's pretty steep. It really incentivizes winning a pot early, not being put in that bind, and playing a little bit looser than normal. So very nice that we were able to get rid of the nit button and actually turned a hand that we were trapping into a bluff on the flop. Coming in at number 3, we have the one time we flopped better than one pair all session, but it was a great time to do so. We flop a set with pocket 6s on the button. We have Z-Fish opening the hijack with 7-8 offsuit. He's been playing looser than any player at the table. Pretty wild tonight. I decided to 3-bet and isolate him. Again, we've got the nit game going, so I'm not that inclined to flat this with 3 players left to act behind me, the small blind, the big blind, the straddle, and actually the double straddle is in here as well. So I have 4 players left to act behind me. Flatting is not as desirable as it normally is with position, so I go for the 3-bet. We're deep enough, we're having a surprise weapon like this that he may not expect me to 3-bet, can play quite well. He does make the call, which this is a hand that you really should be folding once you face a 3-bet if you're not suited here. But, he likes to get in and gamble, and he's got his nit button, and he's going to be fighting for some pots. So we go to the flop, and the flop is queen 6-4 rainbow. Pretty nice for us. Z-Fish decides to check it to us. And I thought that the best play here would be to bet, but for a small size, given how aggressive he is and how often he check raises the small bets. So I did decide to go about a quarter pot here. I could have gone a little bit bigger here, but I just thought this size might induce some aggression from a very aggressive player from what I've observed. And of course, we know from what we've been seeing that his range is quite wide. I didn't really know he was this wide in real time. I didn't know he had hands like 7-8 offsuit, but alas, here we are. He decides to make the call. When he calls this flop, I'm assuming he's got a lot of weak pair hands, some straight draws, a decent amount of Queen X, and maybe some backdoor floats that intend to take away the pot later. We get the 8 of clubs turn, and with this card, of course, still have the best hand the vast majority of the time. If he's got 5-7 suited or pocket eights, it's just going to be his night and he's going to be getting all my money, so be it. We have to go for value here. We have to get the max from Queen X. It is the stand-up game. People are not folding, so I decide to size up close to pot here. So I go for a size of 1,025, and he thinks for a little bit. And in this moment, I'm kind of watching him, and it's an interesting moment because I don't ever get the sense that he's really comfortable with this bet. At the same time, he doesn't want to vacate the hand. So I start putting him on a lot of like drawish hands, maybe a hand like 6-5 suited, 6-7 suited, 8-7 suited, maybe Queen X. All these things that don't love having to call here, given how many overpairs I have in my range. Maybe some of the time he turns clubs. I would have expected him to be a little bit more willing to put money in the pot like quicker if he had clubs. It's just a spot though where he decides to pause for a while and eventually he does check raise me, which is an interesting spot. I start thinking that, of course it's possible that he has a set like 4s or 8s. Of course it's possible he has 5-7 suited. The check raise is a little bit on the small side though. It's a little hard to determine exactly what he's going for here. Doesn't feel like he's really sizing up the stacks to play for it all. And so I start thinking he has a lot of draws here that are turning themselves into some sort of semi-bluff. And now it's the moment to decide whether I want to just call here and allow him to blast river or raise it all in myself. I think calling is a line that we can take that is higher risk, higher reward if it's a player that we think is going to blast off with a lot of bluffs, which he is certainly capable of from what I've seen in the first couple hours of playing on stream. However, I've also seen him make a number of calling mistakes. And I thought that given the stand-up game was going or the nit game was going, if he had a really good queen, if he had a really good draw, like, for example, a 6 of clubs, 5 of clubs type of hand, I thought he would call potentially at the wrong price here. If he had, of course, if he has Queen 8 suited, 6-4 suited, 8-6 suited, none of these are folding. So I just thought it was a good time to get the money in while the board is still relatively clean. A 5, a 7, or a club could roll off, making the river a lot harder to play. Because if I call, keep in mind the pot is going to be 7K. I'm going to have 9K behind. And if he stuffs the river on one of those really bad cards, I'm probably going to have to just hold my breath and pay it off. But it's just a lot cleaner to get the money in now. And so that's what I eventually decide to do. If he's just as likely to make a calling mistake as a bluffing mistake here, I didn't really see the advantage in trapping. If it was another player who would just always fold these, 2 pair hands or even fold the draws at the wrong price, I would have just flatted and let it blast off. He does fold pretty quickly. We pick up a nice pot and we're on to hand number 2. So this was one of the tougher spots because it came relatively early in the stream. I'd gathered a little bit of data on the opponent. But I really didn't have a beat for what exactly his range was in this particular spot. There's a blind 100 on in this spot. So it may look like stacks are pretty deep, but they're actually not. I'm actually playing, more like 50, 4-ish big blinds here. And I decided to raise it up with jacks to 2.5x. And now AJ makes a humongous 3-bet. He goes to 1600, which is very stack threatening, and it's a spot where it's very hard for me to call this and play out of position at like stack to pot ratio of 1. So immediately I am kind of put to the test whether I want to play for stacks or not. And it's a spot where I need to kind of feel out, his strength. I start kind of looking at him, trying to get a live read. It's a spot where we were playing the nit game, but he had already gotten rid of his button, which made the play look especially strong because he didn't need to win a hand in this moment, and yet he's still putting in all this money.
I'm not saying that I'm advocating for going for these huge raises, but like doing things that someone who clearly knows their shit, doing things that is going to fall outside of the bounds of what they're good at is like one good way to attack them and make them uncomfortable. And you can tell, like, Joel is like, I have pocket jacks. That is an incredibly strong hand. But you just freaking, I mean, what is this? This is like a 7x. You just 7x'd me. Why? It doesn't make any sense. That's the kind of thing that throws off a, you know,
that he could have a hand like ace king or ace queen. It's just as possible that he could have a hand like 10s or 9s that's just overplaying here and wanting maximum fold equity. And I thought, in addition, there was some chance that he wanted to just make a move against me on stream to be able to turn over a bluff, a deuce 7 suited type hand, a 6-9 suited, because that's my favorite type of hand, type of thing. So given all the randomness involved, the fact that he could be doing this with overcards or even a worse pocket pair than mine, I ruled out folding. And once I ruled out folding, I didn't want to call this play out of position at SPR1. I just wanted to get the money in. It's really hard if like an ace rolls off. What do you do now? You're out of position. You've got 3,400. You've got a pot size bet. What are you really going to do? I'd rather just get the money in, deny some equity, get the max value. And we get quite a sweat on this flop. So he does call us off after we go all in. The flop is 8 of diamonds, 3 of diamonds, 3 of clubs. And of course, I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. Luckily, we brick the turn, and the river is
living for Joel.
That we're afraid of. We do
The newbie, Mr. PTO Poker, Mr. Joel.
This pot really
Max Payne one time gets the
rest of
full
night.
double.
Nice to win a flip in this spot and to kind of hold to our guns and go with our live read. And coming in at the number 1 hand, we have PTO Poker goes crazy with ace-9 offsuit. What is going on? Every student that I've ever had knows that I do not advocate for having a limping strategy. Why on earth would I limp with ace-9 offsuit from the low jack? Have I just totally forgotten how to play? Well, it's a spot where we are playing the stand-up game, and it is down to me and one other player, Kenny. Both of us need to win this hand pretty badly, or else we're going to pay out the $800 penalty to the 8 remaining players. So, it's a spot where I expect Kenny to continue with pretty much anything on the button. He's going to have position on me. He cannot fold to my raise. It's too big of a penalty in this spot. So I didn't really want to bloat the pot just yet with this hand. I thought that it was a spot where I could limp, Kenny might raise, and if a few other players came along and didn't re-raise him, I might have some opportunities here, especially against Kenny's wide range and the capped ranges from the other players involved. Sure enough, Kenny decides to go to 275 on the button. Turns out he had 10 tray, which gives you a sense of how wide he felt he needed to play in this spot. We get 2 calls, one from Brant with deuces and one from Z-Fish with ace-10 offsuit. It is possible that these guys...
If Joel doesn't back raise here, I'm going to be quite curious about...
intending to back raise if I did something crazy. I kind of looked across the room, didn't get a sense that was the case. It just didn't seem like they were fully engaged in this hand and that they were more just acting mechanically with what they had. And it's the moment where I don't want to call this play out of position and go multi-weight with a hand that doesn't perform well. I don't think that Kenny is particularly strong. I think the other 2 guys are capped, and it's our moment to go a little bit crazy and get it in. So I decide to rip it.
Yeah, okay, okay.
That's
It makes a
what we're
lot
talking
more
here.
sense.
PTO Poker
Kenny has no choice but to
stepping up.
He wants to beat me in a hand in this particular configuration. He can't call down with 10 tray. This is the scary moment because now Z-Fish starts to think about the fact that I have my knit button. I'm a little bit desperate to win a pot. He does like to gamble. He does like to make some moves, but he's already won a pot. He really isn't incentivized this early in stream, having already won a pot in the stand-up game, to get involved with a hand as marginal as ace-10 off, especially when I easily could be making this move with ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-king.
I'm not gonna gamble, but I'm gonna pull this.
Dominates his hand, so he just doesn't have enough investment.
Show it.
Frankly, that's
Oh my God! I love it. Love it. The PTO coach is here to play, Aaron.
Are off to a really nice start on stream. So there you have it, 5 hands that were a little atypical given some of the stand-up game incentives, given some of the live stream dynamics with players maybe making some moves they wouldn't normally make to kind of show off or just because of the extra adrenaline involved.
Big winner. Joel, thanks again for coming out. PTO Poker is his YouTube channel. He's a coach. He's coached over 200 players and was really excited to come in and check out our room. And obviously, he and his old lady going to be real excited about taking home $12,000.
Nice night for Joel.
Profit, yeah.
It was a great experience. And if you're ever in a spot where you need to hand read against some unknown opponents, watch this video again to come up with some tips that maybe you can apply to those unknown spots. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you liked it, please subscribe for more content just like this.